Hi, in this presentation, I'm going to describe a new paradigm for beaver management. Managing beavers at the watershed level, combining riparian habitat connectivity, potential beaver population, beaver recovery zones, and intuitive GIS/GPS field data collection. This is the longer presentation we didn't have time to present at the recent 10th International Beaver Symposium held in Inverness, Scotland. This will be a three-part presentation, beginning with laying out the conceptual framework. This is the work of Bob Boucher. Then Kurt Minke will discuss the technical detail of how such a management plan can be implemented, which will include some important GIS analyses. And finally, Max Rox will introduce some new groundbreaking satellite-based analyses. Let me start by introducing Bob Boucher. He's the founder of the Superior Bioconservancy. He has an MS in Water Resource Management from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's the founder of Milwaukee Riverkeeper, which forwards the goals of the Clean Water Act. He was the executive director of the Cedar Lakes Conservation Foundation, Wisconsin's oldest land trust, and he serves as an advisor to the Beaver Institute. He's also traveled to over 60 countries, seeking out both wild and tame places. So this work is sponsored by the Superior Bioconservancy, which is a nonprofit conservation organization with the mission to restore and protect the connective biodiversity and hydrology of the Great Lakes bioregion, known as the Laurentian Mixed Forest Province. Most people know this as the North Woods surrounding Lake Superior, which is part of the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan in the US, and Ontario in Canada. And the planet is a living organism. When we view the Great Lakes from space, we can see the life zone is a very thin membrane over the boreal forest as it swings down across the upper Great Lakes. This map shows the forested bioregion. The yellow area is the watershed of Lake Superior, which is the most important freshwater body in this hemisphere. There's more freshwater in it than the other four Great Lakes combined. Therefore, protecting this hydrology is wellhead protection for this region in Lake Superior, which is a beautiful, large inland sea. The goal is to protect biodiversity and the natal hydrology across the bioregion with land policies that protect and maintain wildlife corridors between the 21 million acres of public land. This will then avoid fragmentation across the forest landscape, allowing for continued genetic exchange. This forested region holds huge potential for carbon sequestration and is rebounding from clear-cutting and species loss. Our work is based on the principle of conservation biology and applying those science-based principles to create a healthcare plan for this bioregion of the Earth. Lake Superior is the largest and purest freshwater lake in the Western Hemisphere, and as such, it's critical that we protect its ecology and watershed from ruin. This landscape also has a unique overlay of tribal usufructuary rights to gather the fruits of the land across the ceded territory that protect biodiversity. Those rights across the Laurentian forest are sovereign and serve as a protective conservation easement on all public lands. These First Nation values of respecting and living in harmony with Mother Earth benefit everyone and are fundamental to life. This slide shows how the forest is positioned in the center of North America at the headwaters of the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes. Only 3% of the Earth's water is fresh, the rest is salt. Therefore, creating such wellhead protections on the forest land is critically important. This region is still primarily forest and hasn't been converted to agriculture. So the biodiversity genetics are still in the soil and water. It has rebounded from clear-cutting forestry and wildlife loss and still has good biological integrity. However, it isn't without threats such as land use change, bioregime changes, and climate change. This is a high carbon landscape that has demonstrated a capacity to recover its primary features. Recovery will also increase biodiversity and reduce atmospheric carbon, and the forests will be healthier and function more optimally. So we're focused on beaver restoration and management, which will help restore the riparian hydrological structure. This map highlights the hydrology of the region, which is rich in fresh water. Most of the watersheds have low gradient streams and a high percentage of wetlands. Prior to the fur trade, which began in the 1600s, the Western Great Lakes had one of the highest densities of beaver in North America. Here we can look at a historical beaver pond structure. This is what all headwater streams looked like prior to the fur trade. All rivers within the Great Lakes watershed in pre-settlement had beaver pond structures as seen in this map from 1868. The first and second order streams were a series of beaver ponds which made the streams both healthier in terms of water quality and quantity. This aerial photo shows the same stream in northern Michigan that Henry Morgan mapped in that previous slide. It's estimated that the water table in the Mississippi River watershed dropped at least a meter when beavers were extirpated. Beaver wetlands can hold a huge volume of water. Established over generations, beaver wetland complexes form stair-step gradients on rivers and streams. These rivers can then hold up 8 times the water volume compared to a river without beaver. Beaver also filter the water and stabilize water temperatures, increasing stream health. Beaver dams slow water velocity. You can think of them as speed bumps, slowing down the water. So here on the left is Pikes Creek in northern Wisconsin. It has a beaver dam and it's running relatively clear and slow and manageable. The other stream without a beaver structure is roiled up, carrying a lot of sediment and incising the channel. And these pictures were taken about 10 minutes apart during a spring thaw and really highlight one of the great impacts beaver dams can have on the hydrology of a region. Here's an image of the hyphoric zone. You can think of water in the river as the tip of the iceberg, and the hyphoric zone is the ice under the surface. The water volume in this hyphoric zone beneath the river bottom is often twice the amount of that in the stream. And when you increase the hyphoric zone, it creates habitat, it reduces pollutants, filters the water, and stabilizes water temperatures. So how do beavers support stormwater storage? Beavers create healthier rivers by reconnecting river complexes to the floodplains through canals and dam building. They raise the water table, which in turn refills aquifers with surplus pushed downwards into that hyphoric zone. These dynamics mean that beaver ponds function as both sewage treatment plants and storm detention ponds. As an example of the profound impact beaver have on a landscape, this map shows the active beaver colonies in Voyageurs National Park. Over the 50 years since the park was created and beaver became protected, there's a much richer and watery landscape. Over those 50 years, beaver have added 27 square miles of water to the greater Voyageurs ecosystem. This example is a type specimen for the benefits beaver provide to an ecosystem's hydrology. These days, with climate change, we're seeing excessive flooding events all over the country and the world, as with this example. One of the best ways to reduce flooding is to restore beaver-created wetlands. A study done by the University of Wisconsin and Milwaukee Riverkeepers for the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District showed that if beaver wetlands were restored, it could lower peak flood levels by an average of 37%, resulting in savings of over $3 billion by protecting homeowners, property, and infrastructure. So the message is clear. In the western U.S., beaver complexes have proven to be the best fire breaks. This beaver-dammed wetland in Baugh Creek, Idaho, is a so-called emerald refuge that can serve as a fire break and refuge for other species during wildfires. So in summary, beavers provide stream morphology resistance, better water quality, stable water quantities, higher biodiversity, greater flood reduction, and climate resilience. And this is why we called them keystone species, because their impact on an ecosystem is much greater than it might first appear. Beavers are ecosystem engineers and a keystone species. There's several laws and policies that we can use in the United States to protect them and raise their value as partners in biodiversity, riparian restoration, and freshwater protection. Beginning with the U.S. Clean Water Act. The objective with this act is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. And then we have the U.S. Endangered Species Act, another very important law. We know healthy wetlands are vital to protecting endangered species because about 60% of species are wetland habitat dependent. Overwinter survival of many species is higher in areas dense with beavers because of water temperature stability. Beaver ponds are the coral reefs of biodiversity in the Great Lakes region. Now I want to discuss the public trust doctrine. So this is a legal principle holding that natural resources are held in trust by the government for the public's use and benefit. This means the government has a duty to protect these resources for public access and enjoyment, such as fishing and recreation. And of course, its specific application varies by state, as do many things within the U.S. So the public trust doctrine very much matters regarding wildlife management and game laws. The doctrine states that government institutions and agencies are the trustees of wildlife. The agency does not own the wildlife, rather the wildlife is owned by the public. Government agencies are entrusted in the care of these natural assets, and they're to be safeguarded for the public's long-term benefit. The public trust doctrine also impacts wildlife policy. For example, there's the North American model of wildlife conservation, which has 7 core principles. And some of these principles also impact our plan for beaver management. So let's go through these 7 core principles of the North American model of wildlife conservation. The first being the public trust doctrine. The second is prohibition of commercial markets for game, preventing unsustainable harvesting for profit. The third, allocation of wildlife law, which basically says access to wildlife is determined through laws and regulations such as licenses, seasons, and bag limits. The fourth principle is the idea that wildlife can only be killed for legitimate purposes, for example, sustenance, sport, research, etc. The fifth is wildlife are an international resource, so not just a U.S. resource, but international. The sixth, reliance on science for management decisions. So this is a very big part of our paradigm for beaver management. And seventh, democracy of hunting, basically ensuring that all citizens have the chance to participate in viewing, hunting, and fishing wildlife. So here we're seeing a map of the 4 beaver management zones in Wisconsin. And we can also use this as an example of how Wisconsin is failing in its role as trustee within the public trust doctrine, as most states do, because they don't know the population of the natural capital they have jurisdiction over, nor do they keep records or an inventory of what's killed or harvested. So this results in having just a 5 to 6 month season with no limits on take. Any take methods are allowed. The population is unknown, and there's absolutely no record keeping. So this can certainly be improved upon. In fact, beaver are often viewed as a nuisance by the agencies that are their trustees. Agencies have spent millions of dollars killing beaver on the dogma that they damage trout streams, of which there is no scientific evidence. So here we can see that from 2000 to 2021, more than 37,000 beavers were killed. And in the process, more than 2,000 otters were killed as well. So again, we can definitely improve on this. So we can see that in general, beaver management and fur bear management in North America does not follow the North American model of wildlife conservation, and there is no accountability to the public trust doctrine. Most state agencies don't recognize or appreciate beavers as ecosystem engineers or keystone species. But as we've seen, they are the architects of a healthy watershed hydrology. So this has motivated us to design a way to manage beaver using a more scientific method. And we've developed a plan for a watershed-based management system for beaver and other wildlife, which upholds the public trust doctrine. Here we're looking at a sub-watershed map, so I can begin to explain our plan for science-based beaver management. So individual watershed subbasins are like the cell of an organism, and we feel that wildlife management units should be based on such natural units rather than political boundaries, roads, or other components of the built landscape. Furthermore, to stabilize the land and rebuild biodiversity, we need to manage each basin individually. And each subbasin should be managed to promote the goals of the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Public Trust Doctrine. So as a summary up to this point, let's go through the benefits of a watershed-based wildlife management system. First, it allows wildlife managers to be accountable as trustees of public assets. Second, it results in digital hunt and harvest records and science-based population estimates. It can allow for development of sustainable harvest quotas, results in restoration of the riparian structure that beavers create. It provides a baseline of data for things like water quality and biodiversity by watershed, and this can be maintained over time. So this results in something similar to a human health chart where we have a status with all these different metrics for every watershed that we can use to manage that watershed effectively. The ponds and the beaver works will be mapped so we know where they are and when they were developed. And it allows agencies to fulfill their responsibility to the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Public Trust Doctrine. So now we're going to transition to the technological aspects of developing such a watershed-based beaver management plan. And this is going to be some of the work of Kurt Menke. Kurt is a GIS consultant with Septima in Copenhagen, Denmark. He's a GIS consultant and a longtime conservation GIS specialist, having worked for most of the conservation nonprofits in the Western US. He's a specialist in open source GIS solutions. He does a mixture of spatial analysis, cartography, and teaching. He's a charter member of the Open Source Geospatial Foundation, and he is an author of QGIS, the leading open source desktop GIS, and he's on the Leadership Council for the Rewilding Institute. So our study area is large, covering more than 260,000 square kilometers, and it includes parts of the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And as we mentioned, it's called the Laurentian Mixed Forest Province, or North Woods, and it's a transition zone between the northern boreal forests of Canada, which are predominantly coniferous, and the eastern deciduous forests of the US, which are predominantly hardwoods. Outside the major cities, the population density is quite low, and the area is rich in wildlife, including wolves, Canadian lynx, moose, deer, black bears, beavers, and many bird species. The first map-based analysis we made is shown here. This shows the results of a potential beaver population analysis by watershed, specifically Huck 8 watersheds, which are a coarse watershed unit. Each watershed is about 670,000 acres. And they're colored by the potential beaver population, where the watersheds with the highest potential beaver population are in dark green, and those with the lowest potential population are in light green. The U.S. Geological Survey produces watershed boundaries at a variety of scales, so this is the next level of detail. These are called Huck 10 watersheds, and they too are colored by the potential beaver population. So we have this same data at every different watershed scale, so we can drill down and get more detail. Finally, this is the highest resolution available, Huck 12 watersheds, which are about 20,000 acres each. And again, we're seeing this same data at this level of detail. So this data-driven approach has allowed us to identify what we're calling beaver recovery zones. These are the Huck 12 sub-watersheds with the highest potential beaver population within each of the larger Huck 8 watersheds. So in this map, you're seeing the beaver recovery zones as these little purple Huck 12 areas within each Huck 8 watershed. And our plan calls for trapping to be prohibited in these recovery zones. They'll therefore serve as ecosystem health anchors, where beavers can safely breed and disperse to nearby watersheds where trapping has been allowed. So this scheme allows for beavers to thrive as ecosystem species and ecological engineers. They can disperse from these recovery zones every year so that trapped watersheds have an influx of beaver. So this brings me to our new paradigm for managing beaver harvest and how this would work. So again, the problem, the size and distribution of the beaver population is largely unknown. And this results in a wide open beaver season, as we saw in Wisconsin. So the solution is to implement a mobile app-based beaver harvest tool. Also, instead of being assigned one of those 4 units as we saw in Wisconsin, trappers will be assigned a watershed to trap in. Using the app, they'll then collect data about their harvest. For example, perhaps the GPS coordinates, the date, the hunter ID, the number of beaver harvested, a photo, and things like this. This allows the agency to develop data-driven population estimates per watershed because they'll know where the beaver are being harvested and how many are being harvested. And they can then establish a trapping quota. Once a trapping quota has been established and it's met during a particular season, that unit would be closed for the remainder of the season so it doesn't become over-harvested. So our plan for a beaver harvest app utilizes the open source Mergent Maps platform. So it integrates well with QGIS, which is leading open source desktop GIS software. These next couple points would be not things the public would have to worry about. These would be for the agency managing the beaver trapping. But it's easy to build custom data collection forms, set user permissions. It includes cloud data storage, data versioning. For the trappers, it has an intuitive mobile app for both iOS and Android. The fact that it's open source means that you're eliminating licensing fees and the app is free, and it can be used without an account. So it's very intuitive and easy to use, and it gives both the managers and the trappers a very nice system to use. So here we're seeing a video. I'm starting off in QGIS with the analysis of potential beaver population. And so you're seeing how QGIS works very quickly. And now I'm going to get onto my phone into the Mergin Maps app for beaver harvesting, and I'm going to pretend I'm a beaver trapper, and I'm going to record my harvest. So I'm going to enter 6 beaver harvested. I'm going to take a picture. Since I'm actually just in my office, I'm going to pick one off my camera roll. I can take some notes. So these are examples of the kinds of data that can be collected very quickly. So this only takes a few seconds. The trapper hits enter. And just as an example, it's also possible to set this up with a variety of base maps so that the trapper can look at an air photo or an OpenStreetMap base map. The data are then synchronized. Now back in the office, the manager for Wisconsin DNR, for example, can synchronize the project and see that a harvest has been entered, zoom to it, and see that data immediately. For example, the game manager can click on that point and see the data that hunter just entered. The picture, the notes, how many were taken. And if we open up the table of information that manager would see, we can see that there's some things in here such as date and latitude and longitude that the trapper didn't even have to worry about. These get collected automatically. So a lot of this data is very useful, but we don't have to worry the trapper about collecting that. So that's a quick demo of how this system could work both for the managerial side and the trapper side. Next, I want to show a very large related analysis we've completed. So this map shows the results of a biodiversity connectivity analysis. So a basic tenet of conservation biology is to avoid habitat fragmentation. So this data allows us to understand what's necessary to protect connectivity between islands of wildlands in the study area. So this data measures biodiversity connectivity weighted towards riparian areas. So the areas in green have higher connectivity than areas in red. And it shows the connections between the 21 million acres of public land across the study area. This map is another view of that biodiversity analysis that shows linkages. Here we're zoomed into an area in northern Wisconsin, and the linkages have been extracted from that previous map, and we're showing them as this purple fibrous network. This is another example from southwest Wisconsin near Wausau. So this shows how many different connections there are between a state park and a county forest. And not only does this model do a great job of showing the true complexity of the natural world, but it also shows the numerous possibilities to protect connectivity between these two parks. We also see a number of critical riparian road crossings with red markers, which show how the riparian network provides important connectivity even in a highly populated region. So we used a software developed by the Nature Conservancy named Omniscape for this analysis. And this is a screenshot of a web application produced to make all this data publicly available and usable by anyone. So in this website, we're looking at beaver-centric data. So the watersheds are colored by their potential beaver population from that analysis. Furthermore, you can click on one of those watersheds and get an aggregated set of data for it. So the little pop-up on the right shows the potential beaver population for that watershed you clicked on, the total linkage acres from the connectivity analysis, and there are also additional beaver-centric data which we've aggregated to the Huck 12 watershed, such as percent wetlands, percentage beaver suitable vegetation. So this is the beginning of a health score for each of the 3,000 sub-watersheds in the study area. We've aggregated all of this data. This is a screenshot of a companion website which is more focused on that connectivity analysis. However, here too you can click on a watershed and get a summary of connectivity-related statistics, but it also links to the other analysis because it shows the potential beaver population and then more connectivity statistics. So this expands the health scorecard for these watersheds. The last section of our presentation will focus on the latest addition to the watershed-based health record. And here I'll discuss how we can incorporate data on potential carbon and other metrics into that watershed health record. So this section is mapping carbon storage in beaver recovery zones with hyperspectral satellite data. This idea and the accompanying analysis was developed by Max Rock. He serves on the board of the Superior Bioconservancy. He's based out of Duluth, Minnesota, but he's also the account manager at Orbital Sidekick. So he's the lead on strategic accounts for hyperspectral satellite monitoring, specializing in methane detection. He has past roles at Planet Labs and NASA Develop, delivering satellite imagery solutions for forestry, agriculture, and applied conservation science projects. And he has a deep passion for conservation rooted in a lifelong connection to the Laurentian Forest Province and the landscapes of the North Woods. So as we've discussed, beavers are ecosystem engineers. Their ponds create wetland systems that store water, organic matter, and soil carbon. Despite their ecological role, we haven't had a clear way to measure the carbon storage potential of their landscapes at regional scales. To prioritize the beaver recovery zones, we developed a composite score using 3 variables: wetland acreage, forest acreage, and total stream length. These metrics serve as proxies for different carbon pools. Wetlands were weighted most heavily, 0.5, since they store vast amounts of soil carbon. Forests were weighted at 0.3 to represent above-ground biomass, and stream miles were weighted at 0.2 to reflect the likelihood of beaver pond formation. We then normalized these scores to a 0 to 100 scale so that zones could be ranked and compared. This chart shows the top 10, including Isle Royale, Drummond Island, and several in northern Minnesota and Wisconsin. Most importantly, this prioritization gives us a strong basis for where to apply the hyperspectral analysis in Phase 2. In Phase 2, we bring in hyperspectral satellite data from Orbital Sidekick to estimate carbon storage potential with greater precision. Unlike traditional imagery, hyperspectral sensors measure hundreds of narrow wavelength bands, providing biochemical insight into vegetation health, water saturation, and organic matter content. Orbital Sidekick's support in this effort underscores the value of encouraging internal research and development initiatives that align with team members' scientific passions. The imagery for this work is sponsored by Orbital Sidekick for Independent Research, enabling us to push the boundaries of what's possible in environmental monitoring. Using this data, we generate Composite Carbon Storage Index, or CSI rasters, for each recovery zone. These maps combine several spectral indicators: vegetation metrics like NDVI, CL Red Edge, and MTCI, water saturation indices like NDWI and FAI, and dissolved organic matter proxies derived from the shortwave infrared, or SWIR spectrum. The result is a grayscale or color-coded raster showing relative carbon potential within each zone. Next, we'll distill this information into a zone average CSI summary table with 1 row per recovery zone. It includes the mean CSI score, standard deviation, and the percentage of the zone exceeding a CSI threshold. We can also join in beaver population estimates to explore correlations. This becomes a sort of carbon potential leaderboard. To zoom out, we generate a carbon potential map, a high-level view that normalizes CSI scores across all 87 of the beaver recovery zones. Think of it as a Phase 1 priority map, but now informed by spectral evidence of carbon-rich conditions. Finally, all of this is packaged into a spatial layer, a GeoJSON or shapefile, containing zone geometries, Phase 1 metrics, and the new CSI values. This layer can be used directly in GIS tools for planning and sharing. So why shortwave infrared? The shortwave infrared spectrum is especially useful for this work. It captures water absorption patterns and is sensitive to organic compounds like lignin and cellulose, key components of biomass. Bands around 2200 nanometers are particularly effective at detecting saturated, carbon-loaded environments like the ponds and soils shaped by beaver activity. This framework proposes several conceptual outputs using hyperspectral inputs. These include composite CSI rasters that combine vegetation, water, and DOM proxies, a summary table showing average CSI per recovery zone, and a carbon potential map normalized across all zones. These spatial outputs would allow integration with QGIS or ArcGIS or other geospatial platforms. This project shows how we can bring together ecology and satellite science to quantify carbon storage at the zone level. By translating hyperspectral signals into actionable carbon scores, we highlight where nature-based solutions have the greatest impact. What makes this approach unique is its scalability, from individual recovery zones all the way up to the entire Lake Superior watershed and beyond. Ultimately, these insights don't just stay on the map, they directly inform strategies for rewilding and wetland restoration, guiding conservation work where it matters most. So in summary, this new data-driven paradigm for watershed-level beaver management provides a modern digital way to manage beaver populations. It can be implemented anywhere. It can be used for any species. We've focused on beaver in this presentation, but it could be equally utilized for deer, elk, waterfowl, any other game species. It provides a data-driven understanding of ecosystem health. So instead of just being in the dark ages, you can have actual real data on what you're managing. Each watershed will have a health score. This can include things such as biodiversity, species composition or richness. The harvest data can be mapped and dated. Potential habitat connectivity, potential carbon, plus a historical record, which includes trends over time. All of this allows beavers to thrive as keystone species and ecological engineers because they can be managed in a sustainable way with a data-driven approach. Thanks for watching. If you have questions for any of us, you can contact us via email, as you can see on the slide. And for us, we look forward to continuing this work. We are not done. There is much more to do, and we will be giving updates as we go forward, so stay tuned.